Hey everybody, how are we doing today? It's quite an honor to be a part of this convention. I think this is the first wargaming convention I've ever been to. I can't speak for Owen, but it's definitely an honor. Uh, if you would have told me probably beginning of my fall semester that I'd be presenting a war game that I created in a wargaming class at my university to, a convention of people who are very passionate about war games, I would probably think you were crazy. So it's really cool to just be here. And Owen, this is your first time too, as well, right?
Yeah, it's my first time at a wargaming convention and digital convention too. I haven't, done any online sort of conventions or get-togethers at all. So this is a first for me, and it's certainly very exciting, especially to be presenting uh, on something that we've created from the ground up.
Yeah, definitely. And it's really interesting because, it's nice to be up here and talking to people who are like-minded in that we're all very passionate about war games as a teaching tool. And this war game that we're going to talk about with you guys today is something that we were tasked with creating in a classroom environment here at our college. We go to Clarkson University. It's a little university in northern New York, but we were tasked with creating this game over the course of a semester, and we both had STEM backgrounds, as I said, so we didn't know anything about it coming into it. So it was interesting just to kind of get the background of what war games are, first of all, and how they can be used, as a very, very important learning tool. And it's only growing, right, as a field. So it's very interesting. But I think we're going to go ahead and talk a little more specifically about our game. So Soniashnyk is our game here. It means sunflower in Ukrainian. And, as you can see, just based on the subtitle here, it is a supply chain, and logistics war game focused primarily on the current war in Ukraine. And so, I'll get a little bit into the inspiration behind that in a second, but it's been a long time coming, I would say. I mean, a lot of hard work went into the game for sure, and I think that Owen could probably vouch for that as well.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to make uh, and learn about war games at the same time. And I think that this has been a great tool for us to learn about them, um, and also learn about game design. That's a whole nother uh, whole subject that really you can go in depth with. Uh, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we're gonna try and keep it, conversation with you guys. So, as we go through this, feel free to shout out questions about anything that we have to say here. But we're gonna kind of start from the beginning of our inspiration for the game and kind of what it's about. So, um, the next slide's gonna talk more about that, Brent, if you want to switch it. Yeah, so last summer I was at Lockheed Martin in Grand Prairie, Texas, Missiles and Fire Control, and I was working primarily on production operations as it stands, as well as sustainment for the Patriot missile. And so, naturally coming back into my senior year of college here, I kind of had this curiosity about how I can kind of apply, what I worked on during the summer and what I'm going to be working on to, what's being taught in my classes. So, as wargaming, the first couple classes of wargaming came around, I was curious about what types of supply chain and logistics games had already existed out there. Especially having to do with the modern age and modern conflict. So that was something that I was interested in, and I kind of wanted to look further into it. And I found that, as I continued to analyze, current conflict in logistics and supply, uh, in these settings, I found that, particularly in the Ukrainian war uh, setting, there was actually a lot of mistakes made in terms of supply chain in war. And obviously not everything's going to be perfect, especially when we're talking about subjects such as war. But we wanted to take a look at those flaws and kind of create a model, right? And be able to educate people on the importance of supply chain and how, there's a lot to consider in that. There's not war is not just, pitting two people against each other, right? It's a lot of back end. It's a lot has to do a lot with supply and logistics. So we wanted to create that model, just to kind of educate people on that and immerse them into that environment. So on to the next slide, we're going to talk a little more about the game. It kind of took us into the Luhansk Oblast, which is essentially a much more eastern front of the Ukrainian war during the beginning stages of the war. That's kind of the setting that we wanted to set for our players. And of course, we wanted to focus on modeling our supply chain logistics on these different battlefronts as they were occurring. So the way that we kind of wanted to do this was we wanted players to feel as though they could strategically manage their resources through, units that they were able to essentially create. We were like, we have to have something driving the game, and we want the players to be able to feel as though they're controlling their own side by being able to produce units in order to send them where they need to go. So we decided we're going to have these specialized units. We're also going to utilize food and fuel as kind of I don't want to say a currency, but more of like, an expendable resource that you can use in order to not only move your troops to where they need to go, but also that's going to be how you're going to produce. You're going to be considering, trade-offs between, is it better for us to have more resources here versus being able to produce more units onto the actual game. So that was something we needed to consider as well. And production time was a factor that we wanted to consider as well. So, having multiple turns per being able to before being able to produce a unit was something that was key while we were brainstorming this game. So we wanted to kind of immerse them with event cards and supply cards. So supply cards would be the things that drive the game. As I said before, they would include the specialized units I was talking about before, and would also have those trade-offs, as I told you about the food and the fuel. And event cards would kind of be more of a back end immersion, because not everything is going to be peachy keen in war, right? So the event cards kind of serve as a way to throw you off track, or to prepare for unprecedented events that you wouldn't otherwise, know would happen. So we also had the idea that we wanted to have miniatures. We didn't want to have any sort of tokens or coins or anything like that. We kind of wanted the players to really feel as though they were immersed into the gameplay by being able to physically handle like little miniatures. So that was something that was non-negotiable for sure when we were brainstorming our game. So there was 4 primary pillars that we were focused on for being able to communicate our model to our players. The first thing was, real world dynamics, being able to best simulate and immerse people into supply chain disruptions, especially in really high tense conflict zones, right? So not only that, but we also kind of wanted our players to be able to experience those and then model how they're going to work their way around that, right? What the decisions they're going to make, how they're going to affect the overall gameplay strategy that they go into the game with. So that was one pillar. We also had, resource allocation. We wanted to be able to communicate, effectively how you manage your resources in these unpredictable environments. So, you can't just allocate a bunch of resources to one thing, and then let's say, something happens unprecedented. Well, now you need resources towards this other thing. We want to be able to communicate that, hey, you need these reserves, or you need these different things in order to establish these supply lines and stuff like that. So that was another pillar. Strategic decision making, being able to make a quick decision under a lot of pressure. Maybe your opponent does something that you don't, foresee. Having a robust and ever-changing supply line is important to being able to adapt to those supply constraints. So if you're very rigid in your game style, if something occurs and you need to, change it, it's not going to go well for you if your strategy is not going to be able to be changed as you go on. And then the last thing I would say is the impact. So I think this is the most important part of it. We want to be able to communicate to people that their decisions on their logistics, it directly affects how well they're going to do in the game and in the overall conflict of the game. So um, anything that you do in order to set aside supplies, or however you approach your game in terms of what supplies you want to use, is going to shift, the tide of the actual gameplay. Anything can happen in this game is what I'm trying to communicate. So we wanted to be able to highlight that effectively and be able to demonstrate that through the rules of our game overall. So Owen's going to talk a little bit more about how we went into our scenarios and how we started prototyping our game.
Right. So the main scenario that we worked on and developed and play tested is the Battle of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. This is in the summer of 2022. Russia has been working to capture the surrounding regions of Severodonetsk and essentially like catch the Ukrainians on their flanks and encircle them. And so we wanted to explore how resource management and decision making and planning would occur for each side, with the Russians having the strong push and the Ukrainians needing to retreat and defend themselves. So we focused in to just a couple day time period where the Ukrainians are like they're on the run. And so we have a brief history of the scenario in our box, which is it's brief, but it's nice to get some context to it. And the whole idea of the scenario that you play is that the Ukrainian player needs to stop the Russian advance across the Donets River, which separates Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. And the Donets River is, of course, a huge geographical feature that spans basically the entire oblast there. And so it was a good geographical location to look at to focus the scenario on as well, since a river crossing introduces some fun technical aspects of planning and decision making. So you'll see in a few slides that our game board has a bridge and a broken bridge. And so both teams have to plan for how the river will be used in the future, but also, of course, focus on their current needs as well. So the next slide has a second scenario that was in the works and was mainly left untouched due to time restraints. But it'd be a lot of fun to try and get this one working as well. So this is the start of their counteroffensive. Ukraine is starting to get itself back up on its feet. Russia has succeeded in capturing a lot of the big cities, and so the scenario looks at the flip side, where now Ukraine is the offensive force, Russia's the defending force. So the Ukrainian player needs to capture key regions of Liman, which is this near where the first scenario took place. And the Russian team, of course, needs to prevent the Ukrainians from retaking these regions. And so we had an idea that both teams also have a minimum supply level as well, which would be like an added challenge to the scenario, so that we more effectively model what happens after the conflict. So you're not looking at it just in a vacuum, which would be a pretty cool little feature of the game to include. So the next bit here, of course, what's in the box? So there are the supply cards and event cards. There's 2 decks of supply cards, one for each team. Those are where you draw your units from, produce them, choose how you use them. And the event cards are the like external factors to the conflict that you can't control those, so you have to adapt to them, but you can anticipate maybe something is going to happen when the event cards are going to be drawn. So the event cards are fun. Of course, we have the game board, and the game board has printed on it a nice turn counter, hexes, different features, and you'll see that later. And then we also decided to include resource trackers and player aids to make it more engaging and easier to just like sit down and play. You don't need to get a pencil and paper out. The player aids are also nice because they include a combat table, and I'll talk about it a little later, but the combat table is referenced for when you naturally get into combat. So having that right next to you, and some of the basic the rules, how the game basically goes. Player aids are nice, and I like it when other games include them, so we put one in. And then, of course, you got to have the miniatures. So we have enough models of each side, color-coded as well, red and blue. Those are fun. Those are in there. And that's basically it as to what's in the box. Not a lot of setup needed as well. So these are the event cards. There's a lot of different, they cover a wide range of aspects to war. You have ambush, supply convoy, heavy rain, field hospital, all of these have a description as to what the event is, and it's a little hard to see it, but underneath it, the description, there's the effect. And these cards affect both teams, or just your own team. Some of them affect only your own team, like Supply Convoy, Field Hospital, but other ones like Heavy Rain, that one, and Bridge Repair, those affect both teams since they change movement. The event cards on the next slide. Next slide has a zoomed in picture, right, of the card, giving the breakdown. So this is easier to see. The event results is typically a detriment sometimes, a heavy, impactful thing, but they're fun. They add a uncontrollable aspect to the game, which makes it more engaging. Next slide.
For the supply cards, so we have this is the entire lineup here of the supply cards. We hope in the future, maybe if we were to get this game, published, we would want to have maybe a couple more supply cards for each of the sides, but they each represent, a different piece of technology or equipment that the side currently has. So, the Russian side is obviously they're going to have more Russian technology, and the Ukrainian side, they're going to have a mix of their own and, other technologies that they, have obtained from, other alliances and stuff. So, but it's mainly stuff that they have in large quantities. So, and they range very much so in their functionality. So as the game progresses, you're going to be drawing from your supply deck, and you're going to be choosing each turn whether you want to put these units into production or not. And if you choose to put them into production, those little die symbols at the bottom there, that's the amount of turns that it's going to take for your unit to be produced. You can also see at the bottom there, you have an exchange rate there. But each of these cards here was created. I made them in Canva with a little. I kind of made the background first, and I played around with the font sizes and the imagery of them. But overall, what I ended up doing was taking real images of these units, and I removed the background of them, and I made them a little grainy, as you can kind of see, a little dark and grainy, because that's kind of the aesthetic that we were going for, as we were making this game. So. But you can clearly, I wanted to make them clearly distinguishable. You can clearly see, which card belongs to which side. And you can clearly see, how these cards are laid out. So in the next slide, there's a little bit more of a background here of what each of these things mean. So obviously here in the front, you got the unit name. It's just the name of the equipment that you want to produce or you want to exchange. So in this case, you have your AMX-10RC. The specialization, now this is actually kind of important. This is what draws into when Owen was talking about earlier with the actual table, the combat table. So each of these units has a certain modifier for their attack and their defense, which you can reference in the combat table, and that's outlined there. So it's either going to be an attacking unit, a defensive unit, or both, and a mixture of both. So they're going to have those modifiers based on what's displayed there on the card. And as I said before, there in the bottom, there's that symbol of the die. For the production time, how many turns it takes to actually produce that unit. And then if you decide to exchange your unit, there on the left of that, you can see there's an exchange rate for that. So, for this particular unit, you can exchange it for 8 food and 4 fuel. And then, of course, you're going to be tracking your food and your fuel on your player aids as the time goes on. So, we were kind of, as we were making these cards, we were kind of piecing these rules together as well. And we were, expanding a little bit on what we can actually use, these resources for. So in the next slide, we're going to talk a little more about the miniatures. So this was something that we played around with a lot. We weren't sure how we exactly wanted to create them, but I have my own 3D printer here in my dorm room, actually. And what we decided on was we would try our best to find free models online of these various units, and we would go ahead and see if we can 3D print them at a very small scale. So, the initial playing around with it, when I printed the units to scale, they were really big, before we sized them down. And I was like, if we're going to have a hex map, with a realistic scenario, this map's going to be huge. So we have to find a trade-off between, do we want it to be an actual, scalable model of the unit, or do we want it to just be, just add character to the game, essentially. And we decided to settle on the character because having a very big map is just not practical, and it's just not accessible, just from what we learned, not only in wargaming, but, just from scoping out how big the hexes were going to have to be, and if we had, these systems that we were printing to scale. So we initially printed them way too big, and we decided to settle on kind of a 25 millimeter standard length scale. So the infantry units are 25 millimeters in height, and those are the little guys you can see there in the images. But the units themselves have a length. So their length in their longest direction is 25 millimeters. So if their longest direction is, in the X direction, then it's going to be 25 millimeters. So our hexes are going to correspond to that. We have unique poses for each of our infantry units. We found those infantry units on, I think it was wargaming3d.com. And they just had, it was perfect. Like they had 6 different distinct poses for, of Russian, Ukrainian type style figures that we were able to print. The other stuff, though, that is a conglomeration of a lot of different units that we just looked up online. But I think the hardest one to get by far was the Patriot missile system you can see on the Ukrainian side there on the top. That was definitely the hardest one to obtain, because a lot of those ones were just not available, or they were behind a paywall. But the other ones were relatively easy to get if you just looked it up, and you could find a couple different sites which have, 3D models that you're able to 3D print. So that's what we did. It was just gathering those and printing them on my home printer. And these are actual images here of those units as they were printed. So again, we wanted to immerse our players by being able to have something cute, unique, and easily identifiable for people to be able to handle physically with their hands. So our player aids, could you go back? Thank you. For our player aids, those were made by Owen, actually. And there was a lot of math that went into that combat table there, and it took a couple tries, but we were able to kind of get it to a sweet spot. But credits to Owen for putting that one together. We made these in Google Docs, and we printed them out and then essentially glued them to cardboard, because that's what you have to do when you're prototyping. So the tokens that we use to track, you can see that in the bottom left, by the way, the tokens that you use to track the food and the fuel counters, Those were also 3D printed. You can't really see them up close, but they have little sunflowers on them because we kind of wanted something, a little more personal to the game itself. Um, the tactical aid, which is right next to the food and the fuel counters, that kind of serves as a quick, rule reference guide. So in case you need to refer to the actual rule book, you don't have to go all the way back to the rule book. You can just look at the tactical aid, which has a brief rundown of what you're supposed to be doing and how the turn overview goes. The combat table is conveniently beneath that, and that is something that when you have engagements with the other side, that's something you're going to be referencing. And so if Owen wants, he can talk a little bit more like about the combat table and how it works.
Yeah. So the combat table there has each unit corresponding, of course, to the cards and the miniatures. So you can quickly see which two units are fighting each other. Then you have a hit check, which is you have to roll that number or higher. I believe it's a 20-sided die for that. And so if you passed a check, you go on to your attacking and defending modifiers, which are also referenced on the card just by their shield or sword icon, indicating that it'll use it. And so you simply you add that value to the base attack and defense modifier value, which is 1. So you're adding the modifiers on top of 1, and that gets the how much strength is a unit attacking with, and then how much like resistance can the unit being attacked survive. And so it's a it could still use work, of course, figuring out the numbers and balancing some of the different units. But yeah, if the attack overcomes the defense by a margin, then the unit's lost. And then if the there's a toss up as well, where the attack and defend are basically, when it's equal, it's a toss up, and it's basically a coin toss on a die. You have to roll, and you might want to change that just a little bit, but it's pretty good actually in practice. And then of course the range, all the way on the right, to let you know how far away you can shoot. And that's kind of one of the challenges, though, and less realistic aspects is the range, because obviously the tanks can shoot like kilometer, 2 kilometers, and the missile systems, that's just way off map, and the map is, not like the tanks could shoot each other from each corner of the map, so that's not really ideal. So we did have to take some liberties there and reduce the realism, but it is it's still good, though, with how it's been done. So I suppose on the next slide here, you can actually take a look at the board. In the top right corner, you have Severodonetsk, which is currently being overrun by Russians. And you have the red hex all the way in the top right. That is like your starting production line. That's where, and the surrounding colored hexes, that's where any units that have been produced go there. And then the little Russian flag dots, those um, or where the starting troops for the scenario can be placed. Um, and then towards the middle of the board, you have another red hex with the blue hexes on it. And that's the like intermediate forward operating supply line. You have to unlock it by reaching it, which uh, currently there's not quite a risk to unlocking it, and you typically want to get it as soon as you can, so you can start producing troops from there and not having to move as far. Um, and then, of course, you have the Donets River splitting the map in two, and you have on the north side the Broken Bridge, which is actually broken in real life. We looked at it picture. It's actually basically gone. And then Southern Bridge, which is intact, and you can move vehicles over it. So that's a accurate element to the river. And that bridge card, the event card for the bridge, if that's drawn, uh, and then it's immediately played. Um, the broken bridge is now playable, and you can move across it as well. Um, so then you don't have each team doesn't have to move as far to the other bridge, or now you have 2 points of entry, points of crossing there. And then on the western side, on the Lysychansk side of the Donets River, you have the Ukrainian forward supply base, which is a train station. And if the Ukrainians reach that, they can get their supplies there instead of their main logistical hub. And the Ukrainian flags are where the starting miniatures for that team are placed at the beginning. So it's I like the board. The colors are indicative of the terrain type, which was kind of put. It was a more of an idea early on, and then we realized that simply just keeping it down to movement would make the most sense. So the dark green is heavily wooded areas. Vehicles can't go in there. Fields are wide open spaces. If we had done uh, like a counter system with like little tiles, like concealment would have been a thing that the woods had going for it. So there'd be like a reason to go in the woods, but there isn't quite a reason for that. And then of course the dark gray black is water, and the light gray is roads and urban areas. And yes, there's a turn counter at the top and some nice sunflowers in the corners to remind you of what it's like. Let's see, and then I suppose on the next slide you can take a look at the box design. I really like this. Hannah found somebody here to make it, and I'm very pleased with it. We've got the blue sky, the yellow sunflowers. It's nice pattern. Title right on there. Yeah, it really. I think that's a good game box design, if I have to say so myself. So yeah, on the let's take a look at the next slide, and I'll get to talk about how the game progresses. So each turn, there's 3 phases. There's a supply phase, an action phase, and an initiative and victory check. So the team that has initiative goes first for each of these phases. The supply phase, you draw 3 cards. Two. Is it 2 or 3?
It's 3 cards.
It's 3 cards, right? You draw the 3 cards, and then you get to decide which ones get produced, which ones you exchange. And if you have had cards in production, any of them that are produced, or the counter on them expires, you got to put them on the map. That phase is typically pretty quick. Although sometimes there's a bit of thinking that goes on, of course, with do I need this now, or can I push it off and get some movement points with it? Food and fuel. That'll make you think sometimes. The actions phase is next. This is where you get to move your little miniatures around. You consume your food for infantry and your fuel for vehicles. And then, of course, any enemies that are within range, you're allowed to attack them. And you're also allowed to be attacked when it's the next person's turn. So there's where the initiative is kind of useful, is when you get to move. And then when everybody's settled, you finish the turn with a victory check and initiative check. And we simply just went with rolling, and whoever rolls the lowest number gets the initiative. But I was thinking we kind of ran out of some time for our class for designing this, but a more robust initiative system that kind of rewards decisions would be a lot more fun, make more sense. But that's what we have right now for the turns. And so that's also why the turn counter went up so high, as we realized that you kind of speed through some of these phases. And then the next slide here, got the game mechanics. So the turns, we play tested those. 40 turns, it sounds like a lot, but it works out to being like an hour and a half. So that's a good time period for a game like this to occur. The infantry get to move 3 hexes at a cost of 1 food per hex. So but you can move as many or as little of your infantry units as you want. Same with vehicles. Those, you can move them, you cannot move them. And one of the key things here is that the each unit can move up to their max hex, but there's no specification to when combat takes place with your movement. They're separate, so you can engage and then run away, or run up and engage somebody. The catch, though, is that you can't use 1 unit to fight 2 for the combat. Again, there's the movement rules based on the color coding for that map. The water is off limits to both vehicles and infantry. Vehicles can't enter woods because that's just a nightmare, trying to drive a tank through trees. That's the yeah. Even in video games, it doesn't work. Uh, and then you got the combat table, which was shown earlier. Uh, you work off that for your combat, and it's pretty much it for the game mechanics. There aren't many rules or exceptions to rules. We wanted to try to not have any exceptions. Um, uh,
Yep.
yeah.
It seems as though we got a couple questions here. So the first one is from Brant asking, "What are some of the games that we rated and plundered?" Oh, sorry, studied for some of the game mechanics. So that's a great question because this draws a lot from some of the games uh, that we had played in class. So I think something that I could say uh, I kind of wanted to base this on was a very interesting game about the Peloponnesian War called 300. And essentially just it's a supply chain game that essentially focuses on, the Greeks and the Persians. And so you're trying to get as many different points under your control as possible. And where the advantages come in is obviously the Persians have greater number and the Greeks, have greater fighting capacity. And so in that kind of mechanic alone, I kind of wanted to replicate that with the Russians and the Ukrainians, because obviously the Russians do have advantage in number, the Ukrainians have different advantages as well. And so that was one way I kind of wanted to frame the game. But in within talking with my teammates, they also had other games that they wanted to use as inspiration. Like what were a couple that you had, Owen?
Um, the the name that I just remembered actually is Fire and Stone: Siege of Vienna, which was Ottoman Empire versus Holy Roman Empire. Um, that was a card based game similar to what we were trying to accomplish. Um, and so you have the attacker and the defender, and there are unbalanced decks. Um, a lot of dice rolling for that. But that has certain objectives you want to capture as well, and phases to it. Um, another one that I I enjoyed but was pretty complicated was Littoral Commander. Um, the combat in that's actually fantastic, um, but of course that's like a different scope. Um, uh, the the dice rolling is pretty fun for that, so I wanted to try to capture some of the combat aspects from that game. I'm trying to think if there's another one that comes to my head. Um, I don't think I have one.
There was a couple more because a
Another
lot of
one.
them a lot of them were supply based or card driven, especially games, because we really wanted our game to be card driven primarily. But there's also another question here that I think we should get to just in the interest of time. Awesome graphics and minis. I was wondering, why did you focus on tack level instead of operational, theater, or even strategic? Um, so that's a great question. In terms of, and I think Owen could also speak to this as well, but I think in terms of the actual combat mechanics or movement of troops and stuff, we kind of wanted a lesser focus on that and more of the focus on being able to weigh the decisions of being able to choose how you want to allocate your resources. I think that's the short answer that I could give for that. Owen, what do you think?
Um, I think kind of came down to how we were just putting the game together at the end of it. But um, there was there's some talk about the um, like I guess how we wanted, like what part of the supply chain we wanted to look at, because some of them, of course, these big picture ones. Uh, and then I'm forgetting, I'm blinking on the name, but there were these solo games with um, like little printout maps where you place dice on them. Uh,
Oh yeah, yeah, I remember
I
that.
can't remember the name of those, but those also kind of felt like a logistics game. Yes, Battle Card. Yes,
Yeah, that
those
was it.
also had a logistics feel to them. Um, uh, so we want to like balance what we were looking at, but I don't. Yeah, certainly a good question.
Yeah. Oh, I love the fact that your actions are directly tied to the expenditure of logistics. That really focuses on the theme. Most war games have an issue allocating supply expenditure with a unit action. Yeah, yeah, that's something we really wanted to just really frame. Just kind of put into our main focus for the game, which is just that, because it's just such a huge aspect of war and conflict overall. So we wanted to keep the game, simplistic, but also be able to, educate our audience about that.
I also like how the each unit brings its own like flavor, its own strengths and weaknesses to the table, and
Yeah,
so uh, you know you might want you might want to prioritize a certain type of unit over another, or um, you know put it somewhere else, choose not to um, produce it. That's like give a consequence to your action,
yeah,
and link the supply to um, its use.
yeah, absolutely, and that's a huge part of it for sure. But I think getting a little more into the end stages of our design here on the next slide, we talk a little more about play testing. And I think here, if you click on that image in the middle there, it should take you to a video. I'm not sure if you're able to do that on your end, but essentially, it displays, you know, the first prototype that we have won't work on the PDF. Okay. Okay, I figured. But it was a play-by-play kind of turn cycle of our first ever like prototype play test, and we did it on this website called playingcards.io. And I use that because, well, for one, I don't really know how to use Tabletop Simulator or anything else like that, and two, we needed something quick that we could kind of put together, and just to have a basic basis to replicate it. Yeah, yeah. I'll share that when we get out of here. But yeah, we just wanted a basis to kind of establish uh, our play testing. So if you go to the next slide, I'll talk a little more about that. Um, Again, it was on playingcards.io. We realized quickly on as we were playing that it took a really long time to complete the game, and so that's kind of where we got our turn limit from, and that's also where we realized we had some balancing issues that we need to kind of fix and mend a little bit. There's some player tendencies as well, with Ukraine and Russia that we hadn't foresaw. So with all those, things that we had gathered in mind, that first play test was kind of crucial to getting us, to getting a nice final product that we could present to the class. So our second playthrough, that's displayed over here on the right. We had this really tiny board with really tiny hexes, just because we didn't anticipate how small the hexes were going to be. Like, we didn't know how to properly scale those up. And so we recognized that the game structure, as well as in the second prototype, we realized that a lot of the player tendencies were actually confirmed. For example, Keith, to answer your question, uh, there's really not a whole lot of incentive for Ukraine to cross the river. So what Ukraine usually does is they amass troops around the river, and they're able to do that effectively, especially if they have that forward supply base. They're able to just kind of grind out production of units. And over time, if Russia doesn't amass a lot of troops quickly and move towards the river really, really quickly early on, then Ukraine's just going to have just this mass of troops, they're on the other side, and they're able to kind of hold off Russia for a while. So while I agree that that should be some aspects of the game, it was kind of a lot during the first and second play test. We kind of saw that magnified. So we play tested it a second time with that small board. We confirmed those suspicions, and then we fixed our game to kind of be more balanced, and in whatever way we could. And then during the third play test, we had a bigger board, and you'll see this on the next slide here. During the third play test, see in that top left image, that's our big board. It was just a big, really piece of poster paper that we used, but all the figures fit nicely in those little hexes now. It's not, overcrowded or anything. But that was part of our final prototype. We had what we called the Ignite Project Showcase, which was essentially our college, our university wanted us, and a ton of other people to kind of present their projects to everybody. And so we were able to, lay out our game and structure it however we wanted to, and explain how, give a little couple minute pitch on how it works and what we're teaching, what our focus is. And we ended up winning an award for it. And so you can see us displayed there on the right images. We won Best Presentation in Wargaming for our class. And it was really fun. It was a lot of fun being able to go up there and present, to everybody our war game. And there's a lot of people who didn't really know what war games were. So, being able to educate people, especially in a university setting, about it was a lot of fun. And then there in the bottom middle image is how everything fits in the box. It's hard to see, but I actually bought a puzzle box, and I sanded the top part down, and then I put the image of the box design image on the top of the puzzle box. But everything ended up fitting in there really nicely. Like, we initially tried to put the board on like cardboard, but it wasn't really working out for us because the cardboard was too thick. So we had to reprint it onto and just keep the regular paper. But that proved to be fine the way it was. Like, there wasn't any dents or anything. But yeah, that was our final prototype and our presentation to the Ignite Project Showcase, in which we won an award. So finally, looking forward, we do want to publish our game. This is our progress, I guess, on the overall mechanics of the game and how we want to improve it more. There are still some balancing issues that we want to sort out, but we think, once we get that down flat and we kind of sort it out, iron it out, it's definitely a publishable game. By all metrics, we've done plenty of play tests, not only between ourselves and between, but also between people who are unrelated to us, so we could get some honest feedback. And this is kind of what we put together, and so we're actively looking for an outlet to be able to work with a publisher to get it out there. So that's essentially where we're at today. Thank you so much. Oh yeah, I did address Keith's question about the player tendencies, but was the Ukraine they have no incentive to cross the river, was one of them. Could introduce a bit of unpredictability by creating a small set of objective cards for both sides. That's a really good idea. We have not only with the event cards do we have kind of that sense of, you never know what's going to happen. But I think, if we had objective cards, that would also introduce, incentives to all the sides, so that they're able to, kind of work towards something instead of just, sitting there, or not really doing anything or working towards, actually getting the main objective of the game. Yeah. Well, any other questions or comments? What's something that you had in the original design that was pulled out or minimized as a result of playtesting? That's a great question. I can tell you a few things that we added. I think the event cards were added really late. What is something that we pulled out? Owen, do you have an idea?
Not off the top of my head. I know that we certainly changed how the exchange rate was like ratioed.
Yeah, we did a ton of working on the exchange rate and stuff after we did the digital playtest. Oh, one thing we kind of phased out was the second scenario, but we hope to work on that in the future. If we get a publisher, because it would be cool to have 2 scenarios in one game box, so that it's 2 separate, objectives for either side. You know what I mean? But we kind of had to phase that one out just because of time constraints. Other things we phased out. I think that's pretty much it. We added more event cards as a result of our first playtest as well, because we figured having I think we only had 5 or 6 at first, and we were like, we need more of these because, then you kind of know what to expect if you have only 5 or 6 of them. So, we ended up adding more after that. Last minute questions. Well, okay then.
Right.
Thank you guys for having us. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you.